The NFL coaching carousel continued in the 2024 offseason today. We will discuss the NFC coaching changes, specifically the offensive coordinators and some head coaches too. Stay tuned. Welcome into the double FU, the FU times two. I am Jeremy Schulman at FF_Rebel on Twitter. This guy is Jesse Moeller at JMoeller05. Today, we are talking about coaching changes, everything you need to know about the offensive coordinators who moved teams or weren't even on a team last year and just automatically pop back up in the league or in the league for the first time. We'll talk all about it for the NFC. We'll hit the AFC coaching changes probably on Thursday. But before we do any of that, Jesse, welcome in. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. This is a little different kind of fantasy take from us because we don't usually focus on coaches too much and their impact on the players. And it feels like an untapped area for us. So it's nice to kind of dive into those guys and really focus on some of them. And even like we'll talk about later, some of these guys aren't even calling plays and how that's going to work for them. So overall, it's just a fun way to look at fantasy in general for this year, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think scheme fits are super important. That's another whole layer of this, which I don't know that we'll dive too deeply into with some of these guys yet. But certainly just the scheme in general, how the offenses are potentially going to look, how that will impact some of the key players on those teams. And of course, we're not even going to be talking about all the changes on the defensive side of the ball because for fantasy, we want terrible defenses on the other side. So, some of these teams will have that no matter what they do in the coaching room. But, we'll get to that in another show potentially. But for right now, let's talk first about offensive coordinators who have changed in the NFC. And I'm just going to run a list off real quick for the viewers, the 16 or so people who are tuning in at the moment. First, we have Brad Idzik, the Carolina Panthers, Mike LaFleur, now the Los Angeles Rams, Shane Waldron of the Chicago Bears, Ryan Grubb now in Seattle, the Seahawks, Clint Kubiak, the New Orleans Saints, Kellen Moore is the OC of the Philadelphia Eagles, Liam Cohen on the Bucks, Cliff Kingsbury back in the league on the Commanders, and Zach Robinson, new offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons. So we are going to start off first and just mention that only 2 of these 9 names that I listed off are offensive coordinators with offensive head coaches. The first guy we're going to talk about here, one of those 2 is Brad Idzik. He comes over to Carolina from Tampa Bay with head coach Dave Canales. What are we thinking here about Carolina and what Canales and Idzik are going to bring to hopefully resurrect the swift decline of the Bryce Young experiment and hopefully get him back in the good graces of the league and fantasy players?
Well, it's interesting coming from Tampa, right? They were historically inefficient the last few years trying to run the ball. So they heavily focused on passing the ball with Baker and previously with Tom Brady and those guys, right? Like they were like, you know what? Why run the ball? Because we suck at it. So that's not what we're going to do. So they were slaying the rock. Even last year was like 62% pass. I think the interesting thing for Idzik in particular is he's not going to be calling plays like that. It's going to be Canales doing it. So it's going to be what Canales was doing last year. They're going to have a lot of motion, do a lot of that stuff, which is good. It gives you free releases for these wide receivers. But they've talked about running heavily, and you've seen how they constructed this roster, right? They focused the guards, the center. They've revamped that. So I think we're not going to see them like be league leaders in pass rate. But what they are going to do is really get the balls to the playmakers. So like Jonathan Brooks, when he's up to speed, he's going to see the ball a lot. Deontay Johnson, we've been pounding the table ever since that trade, even before the trade from like, we still like Deontay, but now we're like, oh yeah, Deontay. And then it's kind of interesting to see who else the ball goes to with those guys. But you kind of look at it with Canales and how he uses his players. Like he's trying to get the ball to his best player. So I think it's going to be a really fun thing. And I mean, Idzik, he's what, 32 years old? He's a baby. Like I'm 5 years older than this guy. So, and this guy's out here being an offensive coordinator for a team. So he's obviously doing stuff a lot better than I am. So congrats to him on that. But he's 32 years old. Like there are players in the league that are older than him, it's always interesting when you get that dynamic, right? You have a younger coach on top of these players. So it'll take him some time to kind of, get the locker room in order. And if he does right, like they'll be like, okay, let's buy in. So I think that kind of that dynamic with a really young play caller, a really young head coach with kind of a few veteran pieces, which this team has, is kind of an interesting way of looking at it. I'm excited to see it. And with the defense, like they've rebuilt the front seven on top of that too. So it's all kind of coming together where it looks like they really might be pushing 50% run on this team. So like take that for what it is. I don't know about you. How do you feel about this offense in general? Like, do you think they can generate enough points to be a top 15 offense with this play style and the players they have and with Canales' fun scheme they're running?
That's a good question. No, I think that, I have faith in the coaches, but again, keep in mind it's year one. They have to install guys. I have faith in Bryce Young. I have faith with what they're doing and the direction of this team. Like you mentioned, they signed Robert Hunt in free agency, who is a top tier guard. They also signed Damian Lewis on the other side to play guard, who is a decent enough player, but comes over from Seattle. So Canales has that that relationship with him already, knows him from his Seattle days. So, they're establishing the core of their offensive line. They're hoping to establish the run. They drafted Jonathan Brooks, of course. Everything is headed in the right direction. The problem is that they don't have their guys there, right? It's year one. Brooks is coming off of the ACL, so he might not be fully healthy this season. Bryce Young is learning a whole new offense after the disaster with Frank Reich here last season, and this defense is terrible, right? So I don't know that they'll be able to run it as much as they hope they can. Um, Look, I'll walk that last comment back. I don't think the defense is terrible. I think they have a lot of good pieces, but when you ship out one of the best pass rushers in the league in Brian Burns and you replace him with DJ Wonnum, okay, good player. But yeah, there's still a lot to be desired. JC Horn hasn't necessarily lived up to his full potential. Frankie Louvu is out the door, who played so well last season. So they're kind of trying to mix and match pieces here. I don't think they're going to be good on the defensive side of the ball. So I think they're not going to be able to run nearly as much. And you also have a quarterback who's very capable of running the football, even though he's kind of more of a pass-first guy for a quarterback who can run. So I think it's all over the map. I think it's going to take a few years. So that's the super long way, as usual, from me to answer your question, which is basically, do I think they're going to be able to run the football? Do I think they're going to be able, to create a top 15 offense in the league? No, but I think they're going to be headed in the right direction for years to come.
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting when you look at kind of like Waldron, or sorry, not Waldron, Jesus, I'm all over the place. What they've done in Carolina with Canales is the quarterback whisperer. So like he did it with Seattle with Geno Smith. He did it with Baker the last couple of years. So people they're really hopeful and it makes sense. And you look at like neutral. Yeah. And Russ before that too, right. With all the fun stuff that he did until it's kind of just, it's gone downhill for Russ. But you look at like the neutral pass rate over expectation. They're kind of middle of the road. They were like 15th. So they were still pass heavy when they wanted to be, but they weren't extreme pass. Like they kind of, last year with Carolina, they were forced to pass a lot because they just couldn't do anything offensively, like their run rates and stuff. That's why they were at 59%. I don't think they want to be that high. I think realistically, we're talking about 55% because, like you said, the defense is more than likely going to struggle. They're going to be forced to pass. It's just we're not going to see a team like some of these teams are going to be pushing closer to 65% pass. I don't think that's going to be Panthers. I think they're going to try to involve like Brooks when he's healthy, and I mean, you talk about Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders. They want to kind of like keep it a little bit closer to the best, similar to what we've seen out of Seattle these years where they've ran it. Obviously, I don't think they're going to have the success, but I think that's kind of going to be their identity, especially in year one, and let kind of Bryce still develop because he's still got a long way to go.
Yeah, totally agree with you. We could talk all about Carolina, our love for Deontay Johnson, all that content's coming out. But we'll cap it there. You mentioned the QB whisperer. That's the first part of my fantasy minute that I'm working on is Dave Canales in a Sir Purr outfit whispering in the ear of all those quarterbacks. So I already have those graphics lined up. But Yeah, listen, we'll see if he can do it again with Bryce Young. I hope he can. The number one overall pick over CJ Stroud. You would imagine that guy's probably pretty good at football. So let's hope he's able to show it this season now that Frank Reich's out the door. Moving on, the only other offensive coordinator change that we have with an offensive head coach still in place or in place is Mike LaFleur, now of the Los Angeles Rams. We know, that he is a Kyle Shanahan disciple, and we should know by now that the Shanahan and Sean McVay trees kind of started at the same roots and branched out accordingly. But also he's the younger brother of Matt LaFleur, now 4 or 5 year veteran head coach of the Green Bay Packers from the Sean McVay tree. So all of these guys kind of started with similar roots. Now, Mike LaFleur goes to Los Angeles for the first time himself, but obviously familiar with McVay. But does this really matter? I mean, McVay's still the guy doing McVay things, right?
Right, 100%. And I mean, you look at his coaching history. He followed Shanahan to multiple spots. Like when Shanahan was offensive coordinator in Cleveland, he went with him there. He followed him to Atlanta when Shanahan was doing that offense. So they had one of the best offenses in the NFL with Matt Ryan. And then he brought him along with the 49ers. So he had the Shanahan experience in multiple stops. And then he finally got his shot with the Jets, right? And it's like, guess who your quarterback's going to be? Aaron Rodgers, which means you're not going to be doing much stuff as far as offensive coordinator goes. Exactly. And we saw that just deteriorate where the offense really just struggled, and you're dealing with the worst quarterbacks. Once he was out of the window in the picture, it's like the Tim Boyles of the world, these guys that are not NFL quality quarterbacks. So it's really hard to judge how last year went for him because he was dealing with as bad of a situation as you could because it was so heavily reliant on Aaron Rodgers. It's one of the few situations where the quarterback is in control. Like that's one of the few places it's like, I'm running this out. Like this is what I'm doing. So it's kind of a unique picture to look at that. So I think we kind of get a fresh start with him. With McVay, and you've seen McVay, he's the king of motion. They're probably going to run a lot of 11 personnel this year. So they're going to do that. And that's always good ways to generate free plays for offense and get your guys open and free looks. So, I mean, you have Puka, you have Cooper Kupp, you have really good running backs. You got Kyron, and you have Matt Stafford, who's showed last year. He's still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Even if the fancy points were not there, the guy was on fire, especially the second half of the year. So I think he's walking into a really good situation. I don't know how much is going to change. So I think maybe I'll ask you, what do you think? Is there anything he's going to impact that's going to change that offense? Because I think he's kind of going to be there just kind of just do what they were doing last year, maybe tweak it a little bit because the Shanahan and McVay schemes are a little bit different on what they did. So it's maybe he's trying to get some pieces of that and they're trying to integrate a little bit more Shanahan offense. So we'll see, but it's going to be a top 10 offense in the NFL. If you look at EPA and all of these fun stuff, it's top of the line. So I think as far as offensive coordinator, we're walking into a good situation. This is probably one of the better situations to walk in. It's just the offensive line is really my main question. If they fix the offensive line, they could make a jump into a top 5, top 2 offense this year. I think there's potential for them to be the offense everyone's head over heels in love with this year.
Yep. A healthy Cooper Kupp will help there as well. Blake Corum to have some sort of healthy body in the backfield will help as well at all times. And of course, you have Colby Parkinson coming over to solidify the tight end room. But a healthy tight end, they're not going to have that at the beginning of the season. So once they get rolling, I agree with you. But no, I don't think LaFleur is going to really impact this. Just a fun note for no reason whatsoever. Sean McVay's the old man in the meeting room now. He's a year older than Matt LaFleur. He's 38. Mike LaFleur is 37, who's only a year older than Matt Stafford. So if you think Mike LaFleur is going to come in and tell either of these guys what to do with their pedigree and history, and it's just not going to happen. He has no leg to stand on. He's just going to sit back and kind of let them do what they do. But as you mentioned, bring a little bit of the Shanny scheme, especially in run design, could be interesting. But I think, it's still wheels up for all Los Angeles Rams. This isn't changing much.
Yeah,
but
I think it's interesting.
Well, last point. Go ahead.
I was just saying, they revamped the offense under McVay last year. They were league leaders in running duo because they went from outside running to do it. But I mean, this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, so we don't have to dive into this fully. But yeah, it's just interesting to see the changes they've made. I think it's a really good call.
Yeah, totally agree. And I'm trying to see where this is. This is on Twitter somewhere. Derek Brown says to you, Jesse, he says it's tank top season. D-Bro says.
Yes, sir. Let's go. Let's go. D-Bro.
Nice.
Yeah, it's
Nice.
summer. I'm
like,
rocking the guns out here in the Northwest. We get summer like 2 months of the year, so we're going summer, baby.
Excellent. So moving on, here's an interesting thing to consider. Offensive coordinators here that have moved teams in the NFC who have defensive head coaches. So these guys are the head offensive minds in charge of these teams. And in some cases, that's scary. So let's start in Chicago with Shane Waldron. Jesse, this is your opportunity to crap all over Shane Waldron and what he did to you in the PNW. And I believe he was fired from Seattle, if I'm not mistaken. So let's talk about Shane Waldron, what he did to your Seahawks last season, the demise of JSN, Geno Smith, and how is this not going to repeat itself in Chicago?
So what we were talking about in situations last year with like the Rams and how it's a good situation, the Seahawks situation deteriorated and crumbled. You had JSN broke his hand preseason, and he was not the guy he was. The offensive line was in shambles. Geno was they led the league in pressure rate on third down against Geno. He was really good at what he was doing, but they couldn't block anyone. That's why they had Grandpa Jason Peters out there, offensive tackle, trying to play. If you watch the first half against the Rams and then go watch the second half against the Rams week 1, the offense, they couldn't do anything offensively because they got absolutely wrecked. So they had to revamp. I think he was kind of handcuffed to what he was doing. And this is why you saw JSN being such a short A dot underneath stuff, because they were terrified of their offensive line, and it really showed up. It took them a while to kind of revamp it. But that's why it was basically just get the ball to JSN underneath, because they were kind of forced to do that. When you have suboptimal offensive line play, which the Seahawks had last year, it really impacts how you run your offense. And I think Waldron was kind of handcuffed more than almost anyone else. And it really showed up. And I think this was super frustrating to watch last year because they had a ton of talent. They just couldn't work it out. So I think he did the best of what he could. And I think we hear people talking about Waldron and coming over oh, it's the JSN thing. We're no, they're not going to do that. Their offensive line was already decent last year. It should be a little bit better this year. They could more than likely be a top 10 offensive line. I think the offensive line set up really well. So you're not going to have the same problems. And you also have a different skill set of wide receivers. You have 2 bona fide ex-wide receivers, DJ Moore, Romo Dunze, those guys do. And then you have Keenan Allen. You could let him do the underneath stuff in the slot. So I think overall, and then we get kind of their tight end room. I've crapped on their tight end a long time, but he's not a bad tight end. I just think he's not the guy you want to be the focal point of your offense. If you look at yards per route run, he's a solid NFL tight end. So I think Cole Kmet. You think all of the pieces overall, it's just really what Caleb Williams can do as a rookie. I think that's the biggest question mark because Waldron also comes from a McVay scheme with the Rams. That's where he came from before he was Seattle. So you're going to see a lot of motion. You'll probably see a lot of 11 personnel because they have the skill set to run it, because when you have these 3 wide receivers, you want these guys on the field as much as possible, right? So you're going to run a lot of 11 personnel. You're going to do that. It's just if the line holds up, let you do that. You'll see a lot of we call jet motion and things of that nature to see these guys moving. I think overall it could be a very fun offense. And they could likely be pushing into that 62% pass rate, even though with the McVay offense, they're not going to be league leaders in pass rate. They're usually last year they were 57%. I think we'll see them closer to about 60% pass rate in this offense, which with a rookie quarterback and the things they're doing, I think it could be a really fun year. It just might take them a little bit of while because you have a lot of new pieces. You have a new offensive coordinator. It's going to take them a little bit of time to gel. But if it does come together, I think if we look down the stretch, they could be one of the more fun teams second half of the year. I think that's the way I'm personally looking at it. Are you kind of with me on that with the offense, or are you more scared based on what we saw in Seattle last year, where it's it could be trouble for Waldron?
It's middle of the road for me. I mean, here are the things that are similar that stand out to me. Number one, you have Shane Waldron left to his own devices on offense again because Matt Eberflus here is a defensive-minded head coach, much like Pete Carroll was in Seattle. You have a bunch of weapons, but it's they're going to be, with a rookie, new free agent addition just in the wide receiver room, let alone Gerald Everett, a new tight end, DeAndre Swift, a new running back, the pieces on the offensive line starting to gel, right? It's still a lot in flux here that could cause some issues in terms of how is Waldron going to use these guys. But you mentioned it, and there's some things that are a lot better. Number one, you mentioned the offensive line. This offensive line is very young and getting better in Chicago. Number two, the run game, right? You don't have Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet back there to lean on in the run game. You got a bunch of unproven guys who who haven't done a ton, and DeAndre Swift, who profiles more as a pass catcher, right? So those guys are going to be utilized more in the passing game. I agree with you that it should be more of a pass-heavy, scheme. And it's not one that will be dictated by Pete Carroll's need, inner need to run the football down the throats of, this is like, who came out the other day? Was it Lev Bell? Came out like a week or two ago, was saying like Adam Gase would send it in on like second and 8, run the football. I need you to get 3 yards for manageable third down. It's like, oh, come on. Like, this is too old school. So that's nice. And of course, Caleb Williams is not Geno Smith, right? We hope. But, by all accounts, Caleb Williams is going to elevate, look, you never know. But by all accounts, Caleb Williams is going to elevate this offense. He's going to be able to utilize all of these weapons. So Shane Waldron, hopefully, isn't the guy who holds this offense back. It's possible, but no, I'm kind of middle of the road. I think they'll evolve and develop. But we're gonna have to see how they utilize these weapons, and it would not shock me if, even though, as you say, Rome and JSN are not necessarily the same kind of player, it would not shock me if we had a similar situation, because Keenan Allen kind of takes a step up, DJ Moore's who he always was, and Rome just takes a while to and doesn't necessarily get all the opportunity that we think he should. But who knows? I like them all, but yeah, Waldron it'll be interesting to see what he does.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a lot of upside in that scenario, but it's like a pretty wide variance of how that situation could work out, just because there's so many new pieces.
Totally agree with you. And one of my least favorite offensive coordinator hires of the year, but one of my favorite offensive coordinator hires of the year or of the offseason is Ryan Grubb, now of your Seattle Seahawks, staying in Washington after a good, half a week where he moved to Alabama, but then came back to the Seattle Seahawks, hired as the offensive coordinator from the Washington Huskies. Now he's going to be able to revitalize the career of JSN, Geno Smith, and DK is going to be an absolute monster. I'm all in on this offense. I'm all in on Ryan Grubb. I'm pretty sure you are too, but talk to us about your Seahawks and the hype we have this season on offense.
Yeah, so just on an overall construction of how Ryan Grubb runs the offense, the last 2 years in college when he was the coordinator at Washington, they were top 8 and top 10 in pass rate. So he likes to throw the ball. That's something he does. And you're surprised because there's a lot of teams in the NFL that run a heavy pass rate. The Seahawks. The Huskies were up there, and this is something we should see from the Seahawks because it fits their personnel. I think it's really interesting if you look kind of what he was doing with Jalen McMillan in that offense and how it's going to translate to what JSN does. I think that's a really good one-for-one scenario. There are some things that Ryan Grubb runs as offensive coordinator that are really hard to translate from college to the NFL. So that's kind of the one question mark I have if what everything he's going to bring over to the NFL, because you kind of have to tweak it. You can't just be I know we've seen Cliff Kingsbury do this, and it's kind of been up and down. You can't really just bring your college offense to the NFL because it's different personnel, it's different schemes, and different things they do. So overall, I'm really excited of what he did. And even last year, they ran the rock with Dylan Johnson when he was healthy. I know he's the undrafted running back who I think's in Tennessee right now, if I'm correct. It might not be Tennessee anymore, but he's the guy they actually featured down the stretch in that offense. And you saw him kind of shift the offense when they had some injuries to the quarterback and the offensive line last year. They had some trouble middle of the road. He kind of manufactured and figured a way to figure it out. It's all right, what am I going to do? I'm just going to get the ball to my playmakers. So he really heavily focused on Rome Odunze down the stretch. It was all right, we're just going to do this. They lost Jalen McMillan, and then Polk stepped up. So overall, the way he uses his talent, I think it's going to be really fun for the Seahawks. It's just, like I talked about last year, the offensive line, they really don't have the depth, and they've tried to address it. So injuries could be another thing for them, but if his injury, it kind of happens. But overall, I think with Ryan Grubb, I'm really excited to see how he utilizes Geno Smith, who, by the way, had the best completion rate on deep downfield passes. So expect DK Metcalf, expect Tyler Lockett, and probably JSN to be pushing downfield. And this is why Geno Smith's been up there in ADOT. He should be up there again with this offense. So it's really, with the new scheme in Mike McDonald, that defense is likely going to struggle for half of the year. So they're going to be so reliant on what Ryan Grubb can do with that offense. So I think it's going to be very fun early on, and they're just going to be let it fly. So it's year one. The expectations are not there because there's so many changes, right? New head coach, new offensive coordinator, a few new pieces on the defense and overall. So I'm personally just really excited to see what he brings and how much fun this offense could be, because everyone's down on this offense, and I think that's kind of the bad takeaway. I think this is the offense we should be investing in because we talk about untapped potential. I think there's a lot of untapped potential because you have a veteran quarterback who is a good NFL quarterback. Similar to Stafford, he kind of just gets disrespected. He's not Matthew Stafford, but he's like that next tier down where he's like a top 12 NFL quarterback. And that could be a really good NFL offense, personally.
Yeah, I totally agree with you here. I think the same thing as you mentioned when we were talking about Shane Waldron, the same thing is a concern as this offensive line. We have to see how they gel and hopefully they maintain health. If that's the case this season, as it wasn't last season with Ryan Grubb there, I think they're absolutely going to explode. This is an offense that should easily be a top 15 offense, especially with the terrible defense that they're fielding out there in Seattle. I don't know what they're doing, but it's all going horribly, horribly wrong on defense. The offense has to step up, and we know that Geno Smith has this in his bag. He showed it 2 years ago. We know DK Metcalf is an absolute monster on the outside and on slant routes. We know that JSN has showed flashes at this level, and he was the number 1 wide receiver coming out of college just 2 years ago. So, and Tyler Lockett is still an NFL wide receiver. Maybe he's lost a step. Hasn't totally looked like it though. So, that's an amazing third option, and then 2 great running backs. So this offense has all the makings of top 15. Like I said, the NFL offense. I totally agree with you with Ryan Grubb, that being a net positive. Everything he did in Washington should translate now to Seattle. We'll see. It has to actually happen. But yes. I'm very excited for the potential here of true 11 personnel like Shane Waldron didn't or couldn't run a ton last year. I'm very excited for JSN getting on the field for more than 70% of snaps, more than 4 times, like he did last season. This should be the norm for JSN here. I don't care if he's out there in 2 wide receiver sets, sit him on the bench, but use 3 wide receiver sets more. Ryan Grubb, let's go. Yeah. So I think he will, and I'm looking forward to this offense putting up points because they have to.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the one part that kind of gets kind of left for scraps, Noah Fant, they've specifically talked about him multiple times in hospital about him being a downfield threat for them because he's a good receiving NFL tight end. He might not be a fantasy relevant guy, but he'll have some boom weeks, and he's going to be a guy that's taking the top off, pushing it down because this guy's a freak athlete position. So that's why they have Farrell Brown, these other guys. They're going to let them block. They're going to let Noah Fant do the running routes over there. So overall, the weapon and it's a really good situation to be in for a quarterback. So this is why I'm so bullish on Jesus this year.
Yeah, and I love. I was listening to Adam Levitan just this morning, wax poetic about all of his Noah Fant shares and literally the last round of all his underdog best ball drafts. That's the way to go. I'm not drafting him in any other format but best ball. Sure, if he's free, take him. Enjoy those 4 weeks where he absolutely goes off, and then ignore the 12 or 13 weeks where he does nothing else.
Yes.
Let's move on here. Less interesting for me for a number of reasons, but let's talk about Clint Kubiak now on the New Orleans Saints under Dennis Allen, who I can't remember if he's a defensive guy or an offensive guy. I'm pretty sure he's a defensive guy. Who cares? I can't believe he's still a head coach in the league, to be honest. But now we have Clint Kubiak needing to be the savior here with a Derek Carr-led offense and only Chris Olave and the ghost of Alvin Kamara's fantasy value left on this team. I'm a Rashid Shaheed lover, but I got people talking up A.T. Perry and all that. What are we doing here? Does Clint Kubiak matter here in New Orleans, Jesse?
Sure, because what they did last year was so frustrating to watch. They've multiple times talked about. This is why, we've heard a lot of Chris Olave hype, Shaheed type. I can't talk right now. Hype on these 2 guys because they're both downfield threats and they could push downfield. This is what Kubiak is bringing to this offense. So I know people talk about Derek Carr being a check down merchant, and he is a check down merchant, but that's a net negative for an offense to be checking down so much to Alvin Kamara. I get it. Alvin Kamara, everybody loves the name catcher. He's not the player he was. So if you're significantly just checking down to a running back like that, it's really a net negative for an offense. It's you would rather throw the wide receivers. Heck, you'd even rather throw the tight end, even though I know their tight ends are injured. So it's kind of like a motley crew of tight ends right now. We don't know how it's going to go, but with Derek Carr, a couple of years ago, it was with Devontae Adams. Like Devontae Adams was pushing 15 yards down the field, like average reception when Vegas is here. So I think Carr's showing he could do it. It's just going to be up and down because of the style offense they're going to run. But overall, like I'm excited for Olave and Shaheed particularly because if you're pushing downfield with those two guys, like it's going to give you these massive boom weeks. So we talk about best ball. I think those guys are great targets. Now it's interesting because it was so frustrating with Dennis Allen. What you don't want, and we talked about this with Pete Carroll a little bit, is you don't want the defensive head coach forcing plays on like where it's like 3rd and 1, like you got to go ISO running here, stuff like that. When they do that, this happens sometimes because they're like, I'm the coach, you got to listen to me. Sometimes that can be frustrating, and you run these plays that are just net negative. So overall, you hope he kind of stays out of the way and let Kubiak run the offense because coming from the scheme he's coming from, like there is upside and they're like working with the personnel because, I mean, you were in San Francisco, you had a good time. It's going to be interesting to see. I just personally don't think Derek Carr is that good of an NFL quarterback. That's my biggest issue. I think he's what the definition of like mid in the NFL is. That's Derek Carr. He has the arm strength. He's just never really fully trusted it. So if you can get him to trust his arm and really just unleash it and let those guys work, it could be a surprisingly good offense. I don't know, man. Like to your point on Dennis Allen, like I don't have much faith in him personally. So stay out of the way, Dennis Allen. Let Kubiak do his thing. Hopefully it worked. He is the son of former like NFL coach, great Gary Kubiak as well. So like if you recognize the name, that's who he is. Who was an offensive coordinator in the past as well too. So he's coming from Beline's offensive coordinator. Like the whole nepotism thing is very true in the NFL. There's a lot of those guys. He's one of these guys, but he's shown he's a good offensive guy. So we'll see how it works out his first year in the Saints. I'm personally excited. Where do you think this offense kind of like is going to end up? Because I think it's going to be more middle of the road myself. Do you think they're going to like beat expectations, or do you think they fall short with Kubiak this year?
No, they're going to fall short. Look, I'm a Chris Olave lover. He's a dynasty wide receiver 11. I have him on far too many teams for that not to become reality. But no, Chris Olave is an amazing talent. The problem is no one else there is outside of an aging Alvin Kamara. So you just hope Derek Carr can support him. Look, the biggest issue last season was the fact that Carr was on his back the entire season. Thankfully, they went out and in the first round drafted Talise Fuaga, who was the best, if not the second best tackle, depending on who you ask, in the draft this season. He's an absolute monster. Is he a Washington guy as well?
No, he's Oregon State.
I think he might have been. Oregon State.
Yeah, he's really good. Like there's a similar name guys, so I know it's a little bit confusing because they're both in the Pacific Northwest. But yeah, Fatanu's the guy. Yeah, I think he went to I can't remember where he went, but Fulaga is the guy that was the highly touted guy that people talked about being potentially the offensive tackle one. He's a dog. I think to your point, like with Ramczyk and his injuries, I think that's the perfect one because Penning's been just really bad. So I think if he can figure that out, they have 2 bookend tackles. Like there's upside there. Like that's what I like to hear.
Yeah. And I think that if Derek Carr can actually get a little bit of time, we saw him previously in his career support downfield threat receivers, right? There was Michael Crabtree, there was Nelson Aguilar, right? There was more than a couple guys who in that Raiders offense of years gone past, Derek Carr was able to support those guys. He can do that with Chris Olave. I think he can do that with Rashid Shaheed. I don't want to hear about any of these other wide receivers. I don't want to hear any more Juwan Johnson talk. But the other thing is Alvin Kamara. I mean, we're sleeping on him. Certainly in Dynasty, I get it. He's an old guy. What is he, 28, maybe 29, year 29 season potentially. But last season, Alvin Kamara in 13 games was the PPR running back 11 off the back of 86 targets for 75 receptions. He only scored 6 touchdowns, and he was still the PPR RB11. So if you're sleeping on Alvin Kamara this season, don't. I mean, Derek Carr is going to need to check down to him. Hopefully, as we're mentioning, though, they push the ball downfield a lot further, and they're able to utilize more of these guys. I hope Juwan Johnson gets involved. He's a good talent, I think. But really, it needs to be Rashid Shaheed and Olave on the outside. And I think the way they're structured, they need to work outside in. We'll see if that happens. But no, I'm not super confident that that offense is going to be anything greater than what they were last season. Let's just hope that they stay healthy and maybe they can push for top 15. Because that defense is just old as hell.
Yeah, they're aging out though, and I mean, there's the whole elephant in the room of Taysom Hill. And they've already they've already hyped up Taysom Hill. So there's going to be a week or two where he goes off for 25 fantasy points because that's just what Taysom Hill does. Yeah. And with Juwan Johnson's injury, which I don't know if he's going to be fully healthy by the time the season starts, I think that kind of opens up room for him. So yeah, like it's kind of the guys we talk about. It's like you say, it's kind of like, I can squint and see something good there, but I'm with you. It's more or less like I'm not super excited for the Saints offense.
Yeah, totally agree with you. We spent too much time talking about the Saints. Let's talk about the Eagles. And Kellen Moore did some great things in Dallas 2 years ago, did some not so great things in Los Angeles for the Chargers last season. What are we thinking here now in Philly with a bevy of weapons, nothing but elite talent at all positions? And even though Jason Kelsey's no longer there, still an elite offensive line. Kellen Moore should thrive once again. The question is, how are these guys going to be used? What are we thinking about Philadelphia and Kellen Moore as the OC, especially when we still have Nick Sirianni there, likely leaving Kellen Moore to his devices on offense?
Which is actually going to be a good thing. I think you're going to let Kellen Moore do his thing. The whole issue with the Chargers is they were so reliant on these guys that are just not explosive. Like they were the focal point of the offense. This is why they drafted Quentin Johnson. It obviously did not work out. Like we saw this with Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler. You have guys that are not explosive and you're just focusing the offense on them. It kind of limits your offense in a way if you're so heavily relying on those guys. Like they could do the thing you need them to do. They can move the ball. They do all these things. But if you don't have the speed element, like you have no explosive playability in that offense. And that was the thing that was so evident watching this. And Justin Herbert would just be like, check down, cool, 5 yards here, do this again. And you're like, dude, you're Justin Herbert, air the ball out. And it was so frustrating watching this with like Kellen Moore. But like I was really excited about the Chargers offense going in, but like I was watching it like week 5, and I'm like, dude, this offense sucks because there's nothing they could do to really push the ball down and do that. So they really focused Quentin Johnson. That didn't work out. With Kellen Moore, like he's going to bring a really fast pace of play. They're going to be leading the league in plays ran. That's going to be great for these guys for fantasy, right? Because you have it so concentrated on these 4 or 5 assets, which is really hard for them all to succeed. But you have a good receiving tight end, Dallas Goedert. You have 2 of the best like duo in the NFL. You have Smitty, and then we have, Mr. A.J. Brown, the Hulkamania himself. Then you have a Saquon Barkley, like who's been one of the better NFL backs. Like I know we've talked about like CMC. I don't think he's as good as CMC, so it's really hard for him to be that guy in this offense. I think he's more or less a high floor play. And then you have the rushing element of Jalen Hurts, and it's like, all right, how do all of these pieces come together for all of them to succeed? Yeah. And I think it's really hard. I think with Hurts, and it really comes down to Saquon Barkley doing the rushing, who gets those goal line work. If Saquon gets it, like he can get it. I'm not sure if he does with Hurts. But overall, with like Kellen Moore, I think he's going to increase the floor of this offense to bring it to a higher level. And it could also raise it to the ceiling because we saw in Dallas a few years ago, like that offense was cooking, like their expected points per game, all of the metrics you look for like the offense scores, like Kellen Moore was there in Dallas doing that. So I think if we revert to that kind of what we've seen out of him in Dallas, I think it could be a really good offense this year in Philadelphia. So it's all about, personally, I just think if Jalen Hurts takes another step forward and improves as a passer, if he does, like they could be a top 5 offense. Like I think the floor is top 10. Like I don't think the offense should be worse than top 10 with him. I think the ceiling case is like, dude, Jalen Hurts is pushing for MVP. I don't know if that happens, but they have the skill set to make it work. So it's interesting to think where do you kind of stand with this offense? Are you like all in with all of these guys, or based on what we saw last year, the Chargers, are you a little bit more worried what Kellen Moore's doing?
No, I'm definitely all in. I don't think Kellen Moore makes a massive difference for some of these guys, but we saw them, absolutely go off last year. I think for me, the concerns are what the concerns were last year with individual players. Devonta Smith, he needs to be utilized more as a deep threat, just the way this offense is run. They didn't really take anybody other than Aeneas Smith, who isn't probably going to get on the field too much in season 1. They have Paris Campbell right now slotted in as the slot, whether that becomes him or whatever other guy that they have. Certainly they're going to move these receivers around a bit. But Devonta Smith, I think, profiles here as more of the deep threat. I think that's going to limit him because you have Saquon Barkley. You have much improved defense here as well, especially on the back end with those 2 rookies being drafted into the secondary. I think the Eagles are going to be ahead a lot. I think Jalen Hurts kind of tears down his rushing a bit, and we see a lot more of the load go to Saquon. But we saw what they did in the draft, right? They invested in depth on the offensive line. They invested in a pass-catching running back in Will Shipley. They invested in depth at the wide receiver position. with guys who can come in and be serviceable, who can be red zone threats as well. I think that limits a little bit of what Devonta Smith and, of course, Dallas Goedert can do. I think if one of those guys gets injured, the other one has the potential to go off, as we've seen in years past. So that really doesn't change. I don't think it changes anything for A.J. Brown. I think A.J. Brown is the monster he's always been. So I'm all in on the top guys. As far as the secondary pieces, no. But I don't think Kellen Moore, from a fantasy standpoint, changes too much in relation to the production of the top guys.
Yeah, why I was talking about the floor is because they had the freaking rocket scientist Matt Patricia coming in midseason calling plays, and I was like, what are we doing here? Like, I think with Moore, you have a veteran play caller who knows what he's doing. So I think this is the thing that keeps Sirianni away from the offense, is because he has somebody he could trust. Like when they lost Steichen last year, it was really evident early on. Like, it was going well, and then I think midway through the season, it kind of fell apart for them. They kind of lost their way offensively. So I think with Moore, it gives them ability to like raise the floor of all things. So like, to your point with Hurts and all of that, like that's just why I'm more excited, because you bring someone who knows what he's doing. You don't have this issue with like Brian Johnson and then Matt Patricia, where you have multiple guys calling plays, multiple heads talking to the Sirianni, and then he's doing his own. So it just kind of simplifies the play calling and makes it easier for them, where they don't have to worry about that. And you kind of just let your players, who they have some of the best players in the NFL, like at each position, right? Mm-hmm. You let those guys do their thing. So I think overall, like, the Eagles offense should just be like back to what we were seeing the year before. Now, I don't know if the pass rate's going to increase, because it was 54% last year. 52 years ago, I think we're more than likely in that range where they're not going to pass a lot, but they're going to be super efficient with those guys because they're just such good players.
Yeah. Did you say 52 years ago? Because 52 years ago might be what this offense looks like. The way they're going to just pound the football with Saquon Barkley. I think he gets close to 300 touches. I think they're just going to wear his ass out in pursuit of a title over these next 2 years. I don't think he's long for the NFL, certainly with his age and with his injury history. But I think they're just going to use him as much as possible and push for that chip, and that's going to lead to more rushing attempts. So I agree with you. I think they're going to have a high efficiency passing game, but with all those weapons, with the way that Hurts has progressed, they should be able to do that. And then obviously the rushing attack is going to be crazy. So yeah, I love it. Kellen Moore, a good signing there for the Eagles, especially a lot better than Matt Patricia. We got three more OCs to discuss. This is the least interesting of the three, in my opinion. It's Liam Cohen of the Buccaneers. I actually don't have any notes on Liam Cohen. So maybe you can tell me a little bit about him, other than maybe his background, which I can guess by his name. I've got nothing else to go on here about Liam Cohen, who he is, what he's doing. I will tell you, it's unlikely he gets the most out of Baker Mayfield compared to what Dave Canales was able to do. But there's still a lot of weapons in Tampa. What do you got?
Yeah, so they were, if you want to look at just like the wholesale changes, they were middle of the pack in pass rate with Kentucky. And I mean, Kentucky wasn't that great. They were fine last year with what they did, but they weren't really a heavy pass rate team. It's interesting because we've heard talk already from Cohen and Bowles that they said they want to increase what Baker Mayfield is doing. They're putting more weight on the shoulders, where Canales kind of simplified what he was doing last year. This year, they're kind of ramping it up. They're putting more, because they signed him to the big contract. They believe in him, right? So they're going to focus on him. I think it's interesting because Cohen did the weird thing where he was in college, went to the Rams, and then he went back to Kentucky. So he did this back and forth thing, which is kind of strange when you see that. Like we saw Mike McDonald do that, and it worked out for him. Obviously, a lot of guys, once you come up, you kind of stay. He decided to go back to Kentucky after a year with the Rams, which maybe he wanted to improve his passing game, play caller. So we'll talk about, like, if you bring some of that forward, you're going to see a lot more motion from them, which is good. I think that's good for the Bucs, because the more motion you run in the NFL, it just gives you better play. Like, you set up good matchups, and you know the play, how it's going to work out. So, like, to the point last year, like the Eagles were dead last in motion, that should increase. I think with the Bucs and how they're going to use Chris Godwin, I think is the biggest takeaway from what Cohen's going to do, because they've already talked, they're moving him back to the slot, and that's beneficiary for him because he's not an outside wide receiver. He struggled mightily last year to be on the outside. So moving him into the slot, you let Mike Evans be the alpha X. He's kind of the slot guy, and then you have Jalen McMillan being kind of the flanker, because Palmer was not good last year. So if you look at the guys on that offense and how it's going to focus, they have Cade Otton at tight end. It's kind of whatever. He's just one of those guys that run routes and kind of takes coverage. And then you have Rashad White, Bucky Irving, right? And Rashad White's really good receiving back. I'm not sure how that's going to work out for Rashad White, because I know some people, depending on who you talk to, I was high on Bucky Irving early in the process. I'm not so much anymore. Some people are still high on him. They've been really historically just terrible at rushing again. And I'm assuming they're going to want to try to establish the run again. I don't know if it's going to work, man, because the changes to the offense, we need to see it, right? Because they just cannot run the ball. Like the last couple, even with Brady, the last couple of years, they struggle at running. So like they might try to run it early and they'll probably end up shifting because like, oh, this rushing attack's not working again. Shocking. So we'll see them probably push up to like 60%. Like they were 67% pass rate last year, if that correct. Sorry, 58. I'm all over the place. Yeah, so like they'll probably be in that range. It just depends on if they can get it to work with the offensive line. I just don't know if they can, and if Rachaad White can increase his efficiency because he's been pretty inefficient last year's rushing. Like they just, like we talk about these when you talked about Le'Veon Bell, it's like those situations, right? It's like 2nd and 10. All right, here comes a 3-yard run. Now you're in 3rd and 7, and you're kind of stuck. So we'll see how it works out for the offense. I'm kind of TBD on this offense, but overall, like Godwin's the piece I'm most excited to see an increase from the year before.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think they have the backs to necessarily do it. Bucky Irving, will see if he takes over more of that 1st and 2nd down role as a rusher, running in between the tackles, because Rachaad White was not good at it. The one thing that the Bucs did do is they took Graham Barton in the 1st round, who's one of the better run blockers as an offensive lineman coming out of the draft. He'll play center for them, and he's going to be an absolute monster in the inside. That should help solidify that. At least you're not going to have free rushers coming up on the inside either, and you should have the ability to at least put a hat on a hat in the middle of the offensive line, whether that's going to be Rachaad White or someone who's not on the roster yet. Maybe Leonard Fournette makes a reappearance. He's still out there as a free agent, I think. That sounds terrible, but it might be better than Rachaad White running inside. You never know. But look, I think this team is going to be a team that needs to rely on its defense. I think the defense is pretty good in terms of the overall players it has. I'm not so sure how it's going to look in terms of its scheme and what they're able to do with those players. At the moment, they have 2 guys slotted in as defensive coordinator, which I believe was the same a year ago. Larry Foote, who's a former player as well. So there's a lot happening here in this team. And even though it doesn't seem like it in terms of the players, there's a lot in the coaching staff that's in flux, including this new offensive coordinator from Kentucky. At least he's in the McVay tree. But it's kind of a mess. And then they paid Baker Mayfield what they paid Baker Mayfield. And, Canales is no longer whispering in his ear. So I don't know what Baker's going to be. I don't know what this rushing game is going to do. It's a little scary to bet on any of these Buccaneers players. I'm selling all of them. Although I agree with you that Chris Godwin is the one guy that I probably would be buying just in terms of, number one, the fact that he's likeliest to get peppered with targets in this offense. And number 2, he's probably moving on after this season to hopefully a better situation and not Baker Mayfield, despite everything positive that he was able to do for himself last season. So I don't want to talk about the Bucs anymore. Do you, Jesse?
No, it's just like we talked about the McVay offense. It's just the takeaways are going to bring a lot more emotion. We'll keep this. They're going to bring a lot more emotion to offense, and you can leave it at that. Take away what you want from that with the Bucs offense.
Yeah. Fair enough. Although McMillan long-term is nice. I'd say Godwin this season for the Bucs, and then the future McMillan for the Bucs. Mike Evans, as great as he is, just has, his retirement clock, I think, is ticking here. All right, let's move on. Cliff Kingsbury, fresh from USC via Thailand, via where was he? Arizona, getting fired in the desert. Showing off his house during the COVID draft with his feet up in his glass mansion. Cliff Kingsbury, the guy everybody loves to hate, including myself, because I just want that guy's life, is now the offensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders under Dan Quinn. Washington goes from one defensive-minded head coach in Ron Rivera, ships him out the door in addition to every single one of their good defensive players that are not on the interior of the defensive line. And they ship them all out. And then, of course, what do they do on offense? They just bring in Luke McCaffrey, later round, pretty solid, decent wide receiver. They draft the second best quarterback by all accounts and Heisman winner, Jaden Daniels, to be their QB of the future. They bring in Austin Eckler, who, hopefully he's not done. They do their best to kind of revamp their offense. And who do they bring in to lead it all? our guy Cliff. What the heck? I mean, shades of Rondale Moore for me. And if you remember the DeAndre Hopkins route bush of 2020, I think it was, where he was just like, he was doing like little hooks and outs and comebacks, and it was more of a route bush than a route tree. Just ridiculous, unfortunate usage for such a fantastic wide receiver. How does he kill the Washington Commanders offense, and can he avoid doing that?
Well, you also forgot to mention Zach Ertz. Old man injured Ertz is going to be running tight end, so our boy Sanat is going to be buried for a little while. But interestingly enough, like you said, Hopkins, like he was buried on the left side he ran X on the one side of the field. Like he didn't change it up for him, and it was so frustrating to watch. The interesting thing with Cliff Kingsbury is he hasn't really been pass heavy like his entire career, except for his last year in Arizona. They were 14th. They were like 26th, 21st, and 7th in pass rate. So like people think the air raid offense, and they think he's going to absolutely like chuck it a bunch. You also are bringing in a quarterback who is a ridiculous scrambler. He's scrambling to like 50% of pressures. So this means Jaden Daniels is going to be like counting to 2, and he's going to be taken off. I don't expect them to pass a lot. I think they're going to focus on Jaden Daniels' strength, which means they're going to be doing a lot of rushing. And I'm fine with that. It's interesting with Brian Robinson. I think the takeaway is how you want to treat those running backs and the offense. It's just Kingsbury. And it's hard to trust him after 4 years. You kind of saw it run its course. Maybe it comes back. I mean, it's Dan Quinn. He's a complete defensive guy. He doesn't really know what he's doing offensively. So I think kind of what we talked about earlier, Kingsbury is a veteran. He's been head coach multiple places. He's been offensive coordinator. He's done his thing. I think he has respect, so Quinn's just kind of let him do his thing. Now, will that work for McLaurin? I don't know, man. It's a rookie quarterback who took 5 years to really develop. So maybe it works out for McLaurin this year. I'm not really honestly that interested in McLaurin. I think we've seen the stats. It's really hard for rookie quarterbacks to support receivers. This is not CJ Stroud. Like CJ Stroud is the true outlier of outliers. I think we're going to see some boom weeks for Daniels with like the players they have and the potential. I know a lot of people like the weapons. I kind of don't really like the wide receiver room. I'm not big on John Dotson. So then you're bringing Luke McCaffrey, who's in his like 3rd year as a wide receiver. Like he was a quarterback transition. Like he's still learning the position too. So it's just going to take him a while. And I think we could see a lot of variance with this offense in year 1. I think we're going to be up and down. And with Kingsbury, they'll probably have a couple of good weeks, but there'll be a couple of weeks you're watching this offense like, dude, what the heck is going on? So overall, like this offense is just a tough one to figure out for me. And then you have Ertz and Sanaa, and it's just like, all right, can we trust anybody in this offense outside of Daniels? Honestly, dude, I don't know. Like I literally, like I'm projecting this offense, and I'm like looking at the players, and I'm like, maybe Brian Robinson's like the one guy I want to get in this offense because we've seen how Kingsbury has used his running backs. He's absolutely featured guys. So if anyone could be the bell cow in this offense, it's not going to be Eckler. Like Eckler's come out and said that he doesn't want all the time on. So I think there's a case where Eckler could be cooked, and like Brian Robinson could be the star like guy you want out of this offense. It's in the range of outcomes with him. So like of these guys, like I'll target Brian Robinson. The rest of the guys, man, it's like maybe McLaurin, but is there anyone else you're targeting this offense besides Daniels?
No, it's Daniels and Robinson for me. Like McLaurin is fine. I'm not falling over myself to get him. I'm okay, but I think for most of his career, for all of his career, he's been miscast as an alpha wide receiver when he's really a phenomenal number 2. Right, this guy would do amazing things alongside an AJ Brown. In the Devonta Smith role. Unfortunately, he never got the opportunity, and he just had to kind of create on his own against the best talent on the other side of the ball. That didn't work. When he was faced with horrific QB play for pretty much his entire career. Now he's got a Heisman winning quarterback who Jaden Daniels, look, don't sleep on Jaden Daniels as a passer. I mean, the guy won the Heisman for a reason. I didn't love Brian Thomas's tape, Brian Thomas Jr. over there. I mean, Malik Neighbors is an absolute freak, and he is who he is. Yep. But Jaden Daniels put the ball in some money spots for these guys. And he was able to hit Brian Thomas, deep downfield. Patrick Mahomes, shades of Patrick Mahomes. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but shades of his arm in the deep ball for sure. So look, don't sleep on him as a passer. He's obviously the far and away best rushing quarterback in this class. He steps in and immediately becomes a top 3 starting rushing quarterback in the NFL. We're not going to count, Trey Lance or Justin Fields at this point, sadly, but Jaden Daniels really has the opportunity for fantasy to, you can take him, if we're talking basketball, you can take him naked and just rely on his rushing chops to get you through. You don't have to pick any of these other weapons with him. At the same time, I think he's going to excel as a passer faster than anyone believes he can. I think he can outproduce Caleb, even though Caleb's got the superior situation. I think he can outproduce him right away in year one. And, if he's able to do that and lead a Cliff Kingsbury offense, which for me is the issue. But if he can do what Kyler Murray couldn't do, it stays away from the Xbox and all that. I agree with you that Brian Robinson is the guy that you want to own out of that backfield. He's going to get a majority of the work. Eckler is going to be used situationally. They also really don't have a slot guy. I don't think that's Luke McCaffrey. I don't really think that's Jahan Dotson. I think Eckler could be lined up in the slot a little bit. He's not going to one-on-one like cook dudes like he might have done 5-6 years ago. But at the same time, he still has the ability to run a decent route. I don't think he's completely washed. I think there was some high ankle sprain issues with him last year.
Yes.
At the same token, I don't think he's going to get the full load. Like you said, he doesn't want it. I don't think they want to give it to him. Yeah. The concern is Kingsbury tries to pigeonhole McLaurin like he did with Hopkins. The concern is he tries to use Dotson like he used Rondale Moore, with a ridiculously low ADOT. And then you have Eckler and Robinson just kind of chickens with their head cut off in this offense because nobody knows what the hell they're doing. I don't know. Thankfully, I don't care. I want Daniels, Brian Robinson, maybe McLaurin if he falls, and nothing else. Let's hope the Cliff Kingsbury experiment works, but I am highly doubtful.
Yeah, I think to your point on quarterbacks, these rushing quarterbacks who got 5 points per game rushing, the floor is 17 points per game. It was Josh Allen his rookie year. Like, that's the floor we're talking about from Jaden Daniels. Yeah. If he hits the ceiling case, like, he could be 20 plus points per game as a rookie because he's going to siphon a lot of the touches like we see these rushing quarterbacks. So, yeah, like, Daniels is the guy in this offense that's clearly going to be the star. Might not be great for, like, NFL, but for fantasy-wise, like, it's going to be good.
Yeah, love it. Our final, oh man, we've gone an hour. Holy crap. Okay. Our final offensive coordinator in the NFC. We got to do 9 more of these guys in the AFC. Shoot me now. Zach Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. At least this one's juicy. Saved one of the best for last. We got our boy Drake London. We got our boy Kyle Pitts. We got everybody's boy Bijan Robinson. We got nobody's boy, but I like him. Kirk Cousins coming off the Achilles. It's a super interesting fantasy offense, especially one we expect to take a leap. And now we have a Sean McVay disciple in the building running the show because, of course, you have Raheem Morris, super defensive mind over there as a head coach to run the ship. What are we thinking about Atlanta's offense, especially as Raheem Morris takes probably a while to build up that Atlanta defense? That was pretty decent last season for sure. But I think we have a great situation with an average defense and an elite offense incoming. What do you think about Zach Robinson?
It's straight out of the Sean McVay playbook. So they ran 11 personnel. Even last year, they ran 11 personnel 90% of the time. They had 3 wide receivers on the field all the damn time. Now, it's interesting with Atlanta because they don't really have a third wide receiver. This is why they brought multiple guys in. Maybe it's Darnell Mooney. I think it's probably more than likely Darnell Mooney's on there. And then Kyle Pitts is either playing in the slot or he's playing out wide. Like, that's kind of how they're going to roll this out. So we see this with McVay and like Stafford. And then we have Cousins coming in who you can run offense through Cousins. And that's the thing that they could not do in Atlanta the last couple of years with Ritter and Heineke and all these just not good NFL quarterbacks. What he does is he raises the floor and he gives you higher ceiling. We saw Kirk Cousins. He was on career pace last year in the KOC offense with the Vikings. Now, I mean, obviously he has the Achilles injury, so he needs to prove he's fully healthy. But if he's healthy, like, this is why people are so into Drake London in a second round cost this year, is because he can absolutely elevate, similar to like where people were doing with Rodgers last year and Garrett Wilson. Obviously, same thing, he dealt with the injury. But these are the quarterbacks you want to rely on, these guys that don't scramble, these guys that absolutely just feature their targets. So we've seen Kirk Cousins support multiple wide receiver one seasons, like out of two guys with like Thielen and Diggs in the past. Like you saw Jefferson, even heck, like we saw last year, like they were cooking multiple guys. Hawkinson was the tight end one. Like this is good. So like for fantasy wise, I think this is great. I don't know how much 11 personnel they're going to run because I don't know if they have that personnel for it. And that's my biggest concern with them. So I'm just a little bit curious how they're going to work it. I don't have like concerns with Kirk Cousins. He's a very good NFL quarterback. So as long as he's healthy, I think this offense, Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, like they're all worth the price, man. Like they all, like we talked about this on one of the shows before, they all have a chance of being the number one player at their position. Like the upside is there for all of those guys, right? So yeah, like invest heavily in those guys. I just think it's just a health injury with Cousins. If he's healthy, I'm all in on this offense. The pass rate should massively jump up. It was 52% last year. We're probably pushing closer to like 58, 60. It's just, you want to feature Bijan Robinson in this offense. Like they said, they want to use him like CMC in San Francisco. So he'll probably be pushing close to 20 touches a game. If you're giving Bijan Robinson 20 touches a game, Kirk Cousins offense, man, that floor is like running back 5 probably. Like the dude's going to be a stud. So overall, like I'm really excited for this offense this year. It's going to be completely flipped from the dredges of the Arthur Smith 1975 style offense. Like we're moving forward in the new decade, new generation. So personally, like I'm really excited. It's just, can the defense keep up? They could win the division. I don't know if the defense can do it or not, but the offense should be like really good. As you can tell, I'm all in this year.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And CC's going absolutely nuts for this Atlanta offense, just like us. All right. We're dying over these guys because Kyle Pitts is the tight end 5, I think, right now in Dynasty Startups, severely undervalued to me. He's the tight end 3 with room to grow. You got Drake London, who is both in our top 10s as Dynasty wide receiver. You got Bijan Robinson, who everybody loves. He is the guy, unless you're talking about Christian McCaffrey in redraft. Bijan's the guy you want. And then, of course, you have the ability here for Kirk Cousins to elevate this offense, a veteran presence behind center who can calm the huddle, who can lead these young guys is what they need on the field. And he's a precision passer. We've seen it time and time again. I don't think an Achilles injury is going to hurt him. I mean, who cares about an Achilles with these guys like Rodgers and Kirk, as long as, and this is the issue, as long as they have the pass blocking in place, which it's still a little iffy there in Atlanta, but as long as they have the pass blocking in place and they can keep these guys upright for 4 seconds, then they have the ability to distribute the ball, go through their progressions, and absolutely pepper the guys with targets. One of the things you mentioned is, regardless of who's out there on the field opposite London, regardless of whether they're running 11 personnel, Darnell Mooney is probably the number 2 wide receiver. I love Darnell Mooney for this offense because he's good enough to take away coverage, but he's not good enough to take away targets from the fantasy guys that we want. You do not want Darnell Mooney for fantasy. You're happy he's on the other side of the field there for the Atlanta Falcons in reality to help your fantasy studs. So this offense is going to move the ball. They're going to be cooking as long as Zach Robinson, who I have a good amount of faith in, as long as he can cook up some interesting schemes to work guys open. I think the sky's the limit for all these guys. And like you said, it probably can't happen all at once. I guess it's possible, but certainly the overall RB1, the overall wide receiver 1, the overall tight end 1, it's at least a possibility for these guys for sure. And don't sleep on any of the Atlanta Falcons weapons. And because of that, don't sleep on Kirk Cousins. I mean, he has the potential 100% to bring in a high-end QB2, even a back-end QB1 season. And maybe 2 or 3 seasons. If he heals up, they can keep him upright and he doesn't get injured again.
100%. Like Kirk Cousins, if it's not for the injury, like I think he would be a lot higher in drafts. But because of the injury, it's a little uncertainty. Like if you want to like take 2 quarterbacks at the end of your draft, like you go Jaden Daniels and Kirk Cousins, like you get the floor of a Kirk Cousins, you get the upside of Daniels. Like that's how you could go about your draft. And both these guys are double-digit rounds. So if you want to attack that like that, like I'm all aboard it. Like I've been a Kirk Cousins fan ever since. Like I will always be vouching for Kirk Cousins. So 2024 is the year of Kirk Cousins once again, folks.
Let's go. We need to end this because it's been far too long, but we have just gone through 9 offensive coordinator changes in the NFC. Some of them were great, some of them not so much, but We'll come back and do it again in a day or two, or 7, depends on if we can get up the motivation to do this crap again. But we'll do it for the AFC, and we'll give you the breakdown there. We're going to do all sorts of content and information like this in video and written form. We do it at fantasyfootballuniverse.com. We do it on Twitter at the FFU. We do it on TikTok. We do it on Instagram. We do it on, where else do we do it, Jesse? YouTube is a big one. Yeah. Wherever the hell you're watching us now, we do it there too. I think we're on Apple Pods. Who cares? Go to a place where you consume content and look for us, the Fantasy Football Universe. We're here all off season. We are here during the season. We got a lot of great stuff coming up. Tune in this week. We have 2 Warrior Bowl spots to give away. I think on Sunday as well, we have some sort of giveaway for the FFPC. I think. Does that sound right?
Yeah,
we got giveaways and stuff.
We're doing shows tonight, aren't we? I think we're doing a giveaway for the Frankenstein division.
Oh, the Frankenstein.
Aaron is doing that tonight. Yes. Yeah. So we got too much stuff going on. Our brains all over the place.
Yeah. It is Charity Bowl season, so that's what we're doing. Charity Bowls, gotta love them. Supporting great causes all over the place. So if you want a free entry, the opportunity to compete and contribute to a great cause, please tune in the next day, 2, 10, and stick with us all off season long, up until and through this season. I need to end this now because I'm just blabbering as usual. So for this guy, I'm this guy. We will see you later.